Hello, Lobbert here. Please consider giving this video a like and subscribe for more Pauper Commander content. If you'd like to support what I'm doing here, I'd love it if you became a patron. I'd like to apologize for the resolution on this video. I changed a setting in OBS that also automatically updated the scaled output resolution, which I missed when I was reverting things, so it's kind of blurry. But I was really excited to show you all this game, so I think it should still look fine this one time, but because of this, I'm not going to charge my patrons for this episode. As always, there's a link in the description to skip the player and commander introductions, but let's get into it. Going first is Ryan, also known as Papa Pauper of the Common Connoisseurs, a YouTube channel and Discord community dedicated to competitive Pauper Commander. That Discord is actually where I look for players for my competitive streams, but even if you don't plan to look for games there, it's still a great place to discuss competitive Pauper Commander. Going second is me, your host, Lobbert. Going third is Daxgo's Face, who also streams Pauper Commander on Twitch. Link in the description if you'd like to follow him on Twitch, so you know when he goes live. And going fourth is Chris. Ryan is playing Gut, True Soul Zealot, a legendary 2/2 Goblin Shaman for 2 and a red with, when you attack, you may sacrifice another creature or an artifact. If you do, create a 4/1 black skeleton creature token with Menace that's tapped and attacking. And choose a background, with the background of Agent of the Iron Throne, a legendary enchantment background for 2 and a black with, commander creatures you own have, whenever an artifact or creature you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. Lobbert is playing Sphinx Summoner, a 3/3 Sphinx for 3 blue-black, with flying, and, when Sphinx Summoner enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an artifact creature card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Dax is playing Juri, Master of the Review, a legendary 1/1 human shaman for black-red, with, when you sacrifice a permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on Juri, Master of the Review, and, when Juri dies, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. Chris is playing Koll, the Forge Master, a legendary 2/2 dwarf warrior for red-white, with, whenever another non-token creature you control dies, if it was enchanted or equipped, return it to its owner's hand, and, creature tokens you control that are enchanted or equipped get +1/+1. Each player keeps their opening 7, and the game begins. Ryan draws for turn, plays a mountain, and Grim Initiate. He passes. Lobbert draws, plays Desert of the Mindful tapped as his land, and passes. Dax draws a card, plays Fractos Guildgate tapped as his land, and passes. Chris draws, plays a mountain, and Springleaf Drum. Chris passes. Ryan draws a card, and attacks Lobbert with Grim Initiate. Lobbert cannot block, so he takes 1 damage. After combat, Ryan plays a Swamp and Kessig Flamebreather. He passes. Lobbert draws for turn, plays a Snow-Covered Island, and Guild Globe, which draws him a card. He passes. Dax draws, plays a mountain, and his commander, Juri, Master of the Review. He passes. Chris draws a card, plays Lorehold Campus tapped as his land, and passes. Ryan draws, and plays Star Compass. Kessig Flamebreather triggers, dealing 1 damage to each of Ryan's opponents. He then plays Drossforge Bridge, tapped as his land, and attacks Chris with Kessig Flamebreather. Chris takes 1 damage, and Ryan passes the turn. Lobbert draws a card, plays a Snow-Covered Island, and Thought Vessel. He then plays Ichor Wellspring, which draws him a card. Lobbert passes. Dax draws for turn, plays a Swamp, and Rakdos Cluestone. He then plays Tortured Existence, and passes. In his end step, Chris cycles Forgotten Cave. Chris untaps, draws, plays a mountain, and Starnheim Courser, which he taps along with Springleaf Drum to play Heartpiercer Bow. He passes. Ryan draws a card, plays Goblin Chirurgeon, and his commander, Gut, True Soul Zealot. He then attacks Chris with Grim Initiate, and Lobbert with Kessig Flamebreather. Gut triggers, and Ryan sacrifices Grim Initiate to make a 4/1 skeleton with Menace that's tapped and attacking Dax. Grim Initiate makes a 1/1 zombie army. Lobbert takes 1 damage, and Dax takes 4. He passes. Lobbert draws, plays Opal Palace as his land, and sacrifices Guild Globe to play his commander, Sphinx Summoner, which puts Ethereum Sculptor into his hand. Lobbert passes. Dax draws a card, plays a mountain, and Carrier Thrall. He then plays Goldvein Pick and equips it to Juri. Next, he attacks Chris with Juri. Chris takes 2 damage, so Goldvein Pick makes Dax a treasure. He passes. Chris draws for turn, plays a Plains, and a Blank Goblin, which gives Chris 4 red mana. He uses 1 of his floating red and a white from his land to play his commander, Koll the Forge Master. He then plays Ornithopter and adds a 4th red mana using Springleaf Drum to play Empty the Warrens. Its Storm ability puts 3 more copies of Empty the Warrens on the stack, so Chris gets 8 1/1 goblins. He then attacks Dax with the Flying Starnheim Courser. Dax is unable to block, so he takes 2. Chris passes. Ryan draws and goes to combat. He attacks Lobbert with a 4/1 skeleton, and Dax with Kessig Flamebreather. Gut triggers, so Ryan sacrifices the zombie army token to make another 4/1 skeleton with menace that's tapped and attacking Dax. Dax blocks Kessick Flamebreather with Carrier Thrall. Lobbert and Dax each take 4 damage and Carrier Thrall dies, so Dax gets a 1/1 Eldrazi Scion token. Ryan passes the turn. Lobbert draws, plays an Ethereum Sculptor, and Pilgrim's Eye, which puts a snow-covered swamp into his hand, which he plays. He then plays Chromatic Star for free and Filigree Familiar, which gains him 2 life. He passes. Dax draws a card, plays Vicious Battle Rager, which puts a swamp into his hand. He then sacrifices a treasure, which puts a counter on Juri, and uses the mana from the treasure to play Nested Shambler. Dax passes. In his end step, Ryan plays an Entwined Wail of the Nim to deal 1 damage to each creature and player, and regenerate each creature he controls. In response, Dax sacrifices his Eldrazi Scion to make a mana, which puts a +1/+1 counter on Juri. Lobbert's Pilgrim's Eye, Dax's Nested Shambler, and Chris's Goblin tokens die. Nested Shambler makes Dax a 1/1 squirrel. Chris draws for turn and equips Heartpiercer Bow to Starnheim Courser. He then plays Ninja's Kunai, which he equips to Blank Goblin. Next, he attacks Dax with Starnheim Courser. Heartpiercer Bow triggers, which deals 1 damage to Dax's Squirrel token, which kills it. Dax is unable to block, so he takes 2 damage, and Chris takes the initiative, which puts a Plains into his hand. After combat, he plays the Plains and passes. Ryan draws for turn and plays Greedy Freebooter. He then plays his background, Agent of the Iron Throne, which triggers Kessick Flamebreather. He then attacks Lobbert with 2 of his skeletons. Gut triggers, so he sacrifices Greedy Freebooter to make a 4/1 skeleton with menace tapped and attacking Lobbert as well. Agent of the Iron Throne triggers, so each of his opponents lose a life. Greedy Freebooter triggers, so Ryan scries a card to the top of his deck and makes a treasure. Lobbert blocks 1 of the skeletons with Sphinx Summoner and Filigree Familiar. Ryan chooses to order Lobbert's blockers with Filigree Familiar first, so it dies, and Lobbert takes 8 damage. Filigree Familiar triggers, so Lobbert draws a card. 1 of Ryan's skeletons dies, so Agent of the Iron Throne triggers. Ryan passes. Lobbert draws a card and plays Skyscanner, which draws him another card. He then plays Moonsnare Prototype and Metal Spinner's Puzzle Knot, which draws him a card and loses him 1 life. Next, he plays Bonder's Ornament, an Island, and Skittering Surveyor, which puts a swamp into his hand. He passes. Dax draws, plays a swamp, and Commander Sphere. He then plays Belligerent Guest and sacrifices Commander Sphere to draw a card. Juri gets a counter. Next, he attacks Chris with Vicious Battle Rager. Chris does not block, so he takes 1 damage. Dax takes the initiative, which puts 2 more counters on Juri. Dax passes. Chris draws a card and plays Goblin Matron. The table pauses because they know that Chris is presenting infinite mana and Goblin Tutors if he finds Skirk Prospector or another sack outlet off of the Goblin Matron. The table admits that they don't have any removal, but Ryan and Lobbert can both draw some cards, so being first in priority, Ryan sacrifices a treasure and Goblin Chirurgeon to play Corrupted Conviction, which draws him 2 cards. Kessick Flamebreather triggers and Agent of the Iron Throne triggers twice. Ryan passes priority. Lobbert sacrifices Chromatic Star for a black, draws a card, and cycles Barrenmore. He passes priority as well. And finally, Dax passes priority, so Goblin Matron resolves, which puts Skirk Prospector into Chris's hand. Chris plays Skirk Prospector and sacrifices Blank Goblin for a red. Koll returns Blank Goblin to Chris's hand. He then taps Springleaf Drum and his last land to replay Blank Goblin, which gives him 4 red mana. He's then able to re-equip Ninja's Kunai and repeat this process for infinite mana. He then equips Ninja's Kunai to Goblin Matron, which he sacrifices to replay and search for Dark Dweller Oracle, which allows him to exile cards from the top of his deck, which he can play this turn, until he finds Impact Tremors, which eliminates the other players. Congratulations on your victory, Chris! Thank you for watching until the end. Please consider giving this video a like and subscribe for more Pauper Commander content. If you'd like to support what I'm doing here, I'd love it if you became a patron. Patreon shoutout to Bill, Too Much Do, I Have Cryptid, Achu, and Dax. Thank you. Check the playlists on this channel for more videos like this.